Chapter 4. The genetic line consists of the total of incidents which have occurred during the evolution of the nest body itself. The composite of these facsimiles has the semblance of a being. This being would be called the genetic entity or the GE. The GE is not an actual individual, but a composite of individualities assumed in the single lives along the evolutionary track. The discovery of the GE makes it possible at last to vindicate the theory of evolution proposed by Darwin, and to discover the various missing connections in the line, as well as to explore the characteristics, goals, and developmental urges of organisms on the evolutionary line. Further, the discovery of the GE makes it possible to adjust hitherto contrary material in the theory of evolution. Darwin and others proposed some scores of years since that an animal body was developed by necessity into successive organisms, each one better adjusted to its environment. The organisms began in simplicity and graduated through successive eons into complexity. Darwin proposed that natural selection was the guiding principle and that protoplasm, genes, etc., were alone capable of modifying the organism. Later workers proposed ingenious theories of electronic mutation. Prior to these discoveries of Darwin and others, Earthmen accepted various impossibilities as the explanation of the variety of animal forms. The Vedic theories persisted until the early ADs, when a new cult arose in the Middle East, 30 degrees north, latitude 30 degrees to 80 degrees east, longitude Earth, and proposed that animals had been created suddenly from mud by a creator, and that this included man. The Vedic peoples had proposed much earlier that a sort of evolution was responsible for the various forms. Darwin and his co-workers picked up this theory after the Vedic hymns had been translated to Europe about a century earlier, concurrent with the French-English conquest of India. Considerable turmoil resulted from the introduction of the Darwinian theories, as these were then in direct contrast with existing superstition. A trial of a schoolteacher who dared teach the theory of evolution in a backwoods area of the United States resulted in a victory for the superstition, the schoolteacher standing convicted. But evolution received so much publicity over the world as a result that it is now the generally taught theory in schools. However, one should not think of evolution as a standard or precise theory. It is a sprawling and contradictory mass of poorly compiled data taken from ancient swamps and tar pits, and there are many schools of evolution. These are taught ununiformly in biology classes. Biology is based on Scientology, or the study of cells. Existing theory in Scientology is quite contradictory to various tenets of evolution. In other words, the field is poorly integrated and badly understood, and not overly gifted with data. The discoveries in Scientology can be addressed to these sciences of biology and Scientology with considerable profit. By auditing previously uninformed pre-clears up this evolutionary line, the results are similar, if not identical. The most direct address to altering the shape and form of the nest body of the pre-clear is the auditing of the evolutionary line. Many illnesses, aches and pains are residual in the body line itself. These are restimulated by the environment or the thoughts and actions of the theta being, and once restimulated, alter the physical condition of the body. However, the body is responsive in present time to the command of a re-strengthened theta being, and the shape and condition of the body can be otherwise changed than by solely addressing the GE. Single or multiple cells respond, each one as though it had its own GE. Very early on the time track, in the area of the photon converter or the helper, the GE and the cell entity are the same, for here the incidents are single cell incidents. The theory of the epicenters applies very particularly along the MEST evolutionary line. This theory holds that in any given generation on the evolutionary line, the sum of its counter efforts will form in the next generation the new command post. Every central relay point of the nervous system has been at some time or another on the evolutionary line a command post or a sub-command post of the organism. As the organism develops these command posts, each one is subjected to new counter efforts which forms the area of the new command post. Thus the body has many old command posts from which the somatic mind, or GE, controls all the responses of the body. The funny bone in the elbow is an old sub-command post, an old epicenter. Any point of reflex response in the body was an old command post or sub-command post. These epicenters stand along the nerve channels of the body and are like switchboards. They still command their immediate areas and, independently of the central command post in the brain, can cause reaction in their area. The best example of this, and the most important point for the auditor, is the fact that two separate lines once merged, mollusk, and thereafter worked together as a team. These lines each now has its own command post, its own memory bank. These two lines are the right and left brain lobes. The one in ascendancy ordinarily commands the one in subjugation. The right side of the brain controls the left side of the body. The left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. Malcoordination of the two halves of the body can be traced to imbalance or confusion or outright warfare between these two control centers. Half paralysis, stroke, Anesthesized areas can be traced in part to this malcoordination of the present lifetime epicenters. Each one of these goes back as itself along the same track, generation to generation, sharing the same experiences until one reaches the mollusk or bivalve state, where each one has a prior and independent and separate history. Either one is capable of controlling the whole body. In the bivalve state, one finds them at war with each other in an effort to attain sole command of the entire bivalve. Right and left-handedness are caused by these malcoordinations of the two lines. Actually, one could be neither right-handed nor left-handed, but ambidextrous. An entire technique, complete within itself, was worked out some months ago when I first encountered these phenomena. This technique has been working so well for some auditors that they wonder why any newer data is introduced. The technique consists of obtaining optimum communication amongst all epicenters in the body, with the result of a complete unity of action by the body. This does a great deal for timing and coordination in general, and has been known to eradicate severe psychosomatic ills. Theta line techniques being addressed to I rather than to the MES body produce swifter results. Here is a wealth of material for the investigator. The principal incidents and circumstances on this line have already been located and were located before this data was realized the first time, but innumerable structural puzzles are resolved with this data, and few are the pre-clears whose bodies do not react vigorously to the suggestion that some of these incidents may exist, so violent is the charge contained in these incidents. An E-meter has been known to drop as many as 20 dials on the auditor's faint hint of the existence of the helper or the weeper. Life on the evolutionary line is grim, very tooth and claw. So overpoweringly awesome has been life on this line that the violence pervaded the social theory of psychology for decades, and indeed has underlain the most basic philosophies of man's behavior. Here, at the very least, is the explanation for so many theories in the past. It should not be overlooked that on this GE line one finds what the uninitiated call past lives. This continuous living on the part of the somatic mind does not end with the ape. It continues right on through to present time. The GE contains enormous amounts of data about recent times and past times. The GE in America seems to have followed the track of the Western civilizations. This accounts in part for the strange fact that our histories give us enormous treatises on Greece and nothing on Persia, great tomes on Rome and little on Egypt, enormous writings on that small continent, Europe, and very little on Asia. A correct track of civilization is not from Phoenicia through Greece, Rome, and Europe to America. It's from China, through Chaldea, through Babylonia, through Persia, through Achaea, and minorly through Greece, Rome, and Europe, since these last form a decline from civilizations at various times and periods. It usually passed through Greece and Rome and Europe, which accounts for our fixation on these minor empires and inferior societies. The point here is that a study of history is very re-stimulative to the GE and produces body alterations for which the theta being, not having been there usually, cannot account. You, as a theta being, may or may not have seen Greece or Rome. Your messed GE has probably activated a body there, just as it has been, in accordance with Darwin and his Russian copyist, one of the patron saints of the current slave state of Russia, Lysenko, an anthropoid in the deep forests of forgotten continents, or a mollusk seeking to survive on the shore of some lost sea. By the way, if you cannot take a warning, your discussion of these incidents with the uninitiated in Scientology can produce havoc. Should you describe the clam to someone, you may re-stimulate it in him to the extent of causing severe jaw hinge pain. One such victim, after hearing about a clam death, could not use his jaws for 3 days. Another had to have 2 molars extracted because of the resulting ache. The clam and all these incidents are very much present in the GE and can be re-stimulated easily. So do not be sadistic with your describing them to people, unless of course they belligerently claim that man has no past memory for his evolution. In that event, describe away. It makes believers over and above, enriching your friend the dentist, who indeed could not exist without these errors and incidents on the evolutionary line. The auditor should know about this line, for it sometimes crosses the theta line, which is to say it is co-experienced in places by the theta being. This is simple to unravel. Also, the pre-clear may have a GE incident in such in such forceful re-stimulation that the auditor has no choice but to audit it. When one says GE incident, he means, of course, anything on the entire evolutionary line, including past lives. One must not forget that the theta being has also shared with another, not present, GE, some of these past life experiences. One can discover when the theta being first came to Earth, when it first had a messed body on Earth, and so discover its first contact with some messed body line. It has co-experienced with a GE in every life where it has had a messed body. There are extraterrestrial GEs, perhaps GEs which evolved elsewhere and which are still elsewhere. These GEs would be on the evolutionary line of some other planet. They would not cross into this evolutionary line, but the theta being, where it has had a messed body on some other planet, may have had it in company with a GE there which had its own peculiarities. One almost never audits such a thing, but it is remarked that it can be there. The following incidents are audited with the usual tools of Dianetics and Scientology, with due attention to Technique 80. One may wonder what a clam might consider an overt act. The best way to find out is to put it on the e-meter and ask. Every one of these, when inexperienced to be audited, is part of a motivator-overt combination. When they do not react on a meter, when they do not present themselves to be audited, don't bother to go looking for them. If they are to be audited, they will react with violence, as much as a 5 or a 20 dial drop on the e-meter. If they drop in such a fashion, there is a companion incident, which is to say that they have motivators where there are overt acts and overt acts where they are motivators. Such a drop means that they are being used in present time as motivators or overt acts. The atom. Lucretius said that each atom was life. This may or may not be true, but the first incident one finds in the GE behaves as though the preclear were an atom, complete with electronic rings. This incident audits very poorly until it's located as a companion to some overt act. There seems to be a hole in space immediately ahead of the atom. Just after this hole is a condition of motion, with the preclear in the center, with rings of motion traveling around him. Characteristic of this incident is a state of mind wanting no ARC, neither to receive ARC nor to give ARC, wanting no ARC give or take. This is a comfortable aloneness. The preclear usually perceives from his later necessities for ARC on a messed level. The cosmic impact. As physicists tell us, cosmic rays enter the body in large numbers and occasionally explode in the body. Very early on the track, the impact of a cosmic ray and its explosion is very destructive to the existing organism. One is accepting rays and suddenly one explodes. Sometimes one's accepting one while another explodes elsewhere. This has been found fairly basic on an anxiety stomach, on acception, rejection, confusions. Remember that in all early incidents there is a GE line for the left side of the body and one for the right side, and either one can affect the whole body when it is run. Thus there are atoms for the right and left and cosmic rays for the right and left sides both. The photon converter. All early life is fixated on converting photons to energy. One finds the algae and the plankton taking their living photons from the sun and minerals from the sea. Because at night there's no sunlight, the photon converter sinks into an apathy, which eons later becomes the messed body's craving for sleep. This is a basic problem of no energy received, very little storage for energy. All photon converter incidents are concerned with light and dark, the storms of the sea, the fight to keep from rolling into the surf. The fear and combat with the merciless surf is characteristic of all early incidents until well after the Weeper. Sending the ill to the seashore to listen to surf is a guaranteed re-stimulator. There are many types of these incidents. A basic one is concerned with fear of sinking, effort to rise, for the photon converter must stay afloat. Past deaths as a photon converter are common, for only by dying and knowing how one died could the GE utilize the chief counter-efforts which menaced. A chain of experience which did not include death would not be able to build efficient organisms and would be unprofitable. Death on the GE line has a very great value and marks progress. Death on the theta line is so much wasted time. Hence the quarrel between the GE and the theta being. The helper. The helper is one of the most powerful incidents in terms of charge on the early track. It is actually mitosis or cell splitting. The GE carries along a tiny cell, mobile and swimming. Suddenly it decides to divide. It starts to split in half. There is usually an enormous struggle in this splitting. One side wants to split, the other usually does not want to split. Having split, one side is energetic and starts to go about its business. Then it sees that the other side is limp and falling toward the mud below the water. The energetic side turns and dives and tries to nudge the other up to the surface, tries to revive it. The failing side may revive. In the incidents, you will find there'll be one or two outcomes. The failing side fails despite the other's efforts. The failing side revives, and now, all energetic, swims away, leaving to his fate the other that helped it, who is now too weak to live, and so sinks and dies. There are two sides to the helper. The whole sequence of the losing side is present, the whole sequence of the winning side is present. The confusion lies in the fact that each is itself, but a moment ago was the other. There are whole squads of helpers. It's a confusing area for the GE, which therein has caused much cause for misidentification. The clam. A variety of incidents may intervene between the helper and the weeper. These are the evolution chain, which includes jellyfish, seaweed, and some other forms. It is interesting that immobile states are most liable to have heavy incidents. It is also interesting that bulbous seaweed, uprooted and cast shore by storms, gave man some of his early experiences with sunlight in the absence of water. A distinct somatic of drying and itching is felt by pre-clears when they encounter this incident. A re-stimulation of the drying outer skin of the dying seaweed. It is also interesting that bulbous seaweed is an early pattern of man's later general form. Jellyfish incidents are quite remarkable for their occasional aberrative force. The jellyfish sometimes drifts into a cave or grotto and is pressed against the stone by rising tide and waves, thus gaining the first facsimiles which later become a shell, as in the clam. Here's an example of the principle of the counter-effort moulding the physical shape and necessities of forms. The clam is a deadly incident, but mostly when re-stimulated on purpose. Although this area of the track is called the clam, it is improbable that the actual animal was a clam, such as our razorbacks. Visios on this seem to indicate that it is a scalloped lip white-shelled creature. The clam was, of course, quite thoroughly fixed to the rocks, and the state is very static. The clam had many troubles. The first of these troubles is the double hinge problem. One hinge wishes to stay open, the other tries to close. Thus conflict occurs. Here we have two control centers, both of them more or less equal in power, having no internal communication. In the jellyfish, we have the first third dynamic engrams, where the goal is to hold together at all costs. As soon as the hinges are formed in the clam, we have our first efforts to be completely contrary and internally at war. The solution occurs when one hinge goes into apathy and the other assumes complete control. The hinge epicenters later become the hinges of the human jaw. Should you desire to confirm this, describe to some uninitiated person the death of a clam without saying what you're describing. Can you imagine a clam sitting on the beach, opening and closing its shell very rapidly? Make a motion with your thumb and forefinger of a rapid opening and closing. The victim may grip his jaws with his hand and feel quite upset. He may even have to have a few teeth pulled. At the very least, he will argue as to whether or not the shell stays open at the end or closed. He will, with no hint of the death aspect of it, talk about the poor clam, and he will feel quite sad emotionally. The clam had an astonishing number of adventures for so minor a creature. It would get things into its shell and be unable to get them out. It would get its shell stuck open and be unable to shut it. It would come loose from its rocks under the surface of the water and get tossed into the broil of the surf. And it would become deserted by the tide and left to bake under a frying sun. A quite uncomfortable situation which re-stimulates sometimes in a sunburn. There was, or is, a spore method of procreation used by the clam. The spore was put on the inside of the lip and permitted to grow. Eventually it became large enough to become a clam on its own and would depart. There's a guardian emotion on the part of the clam for these spores and a sadness on their departure. But there's more to the spore than this. The spore was like a barnacle. When the clam was cast ashore, these spores were still alive in the shell. The sun would kill the inner cells of the barnacle while the outer shell cells still lived. The dead inner cells would form a gas which under the heat would explode violently to the agony of the living barnacle shell cells. This bursting was sudden and painful. These spores gave incidents which permitted the human teeth to have a pattern. The ancient bursting engrams are still dramatized by the teeth, which under stress burst or feel like bursting. Running out some of these bursting incidents will take the ache out of a tooth rapidly. The fifth nerve channel is around the mouth and is heavy out of all proportion. A nerve channel is as heavy as it has to conduit pain away from the area. Thus I deduced that there must have been much pain in this area, and that the fifth channel is the oldest main conduit, and so it is. Audit all such incidents for all teeth, and you've permanently taken the pain out of toothache and cut down tooth decay. By the way, a barnacle, because of this bursting possibility, at length developed a blowout area, a cap which would blow easily. And teeth have such an area. It gives way and makes cavities. The clam had many, many deaths. A scan across its deaths locates the one in restimulation. You will be amazed to find the clam sufficiently advanced as a cellular somatic mind to have postulates, to think thoughts. The clam is actually a group of incidents rather than a single one. The Weeper. After leaving the sea, the GE spent 500,000 years on the beach. It had already known about air as a plankton, had known about the beach as seaweed and dying clam, but it nevertheless required some 500,000 years, according to the evolutionists, for the creature to learn to use the land. The plights of the Weeper are many and pathetic. Still obtaining its food from the waves, it yet had to breathe. Waves are impetuous and often irregular. The Weeper would open up to get food from the water and get a wave in the shell. It would vigorously pump out the water and try to get some air, and then before it could gulp atmosphere, be hit by another wave. Here was the anxiety. Being still a shell animal, the mobility of the Weeper is poor. It could not withdraw rapidly, nor advance rapidly. Tides went out and left it to bake and thirst. The sand got into it, and it had to pump water swiftly in order to continue to live. The Weeper is so called because it had to pump salt water. It was deduced that crying in a human being is very unnatural. Why is it that a human has to pump out some salt water in order to feel better? Which is to say, why does crying out a grief charge produce such a change in a case? The incident must be one of pumping out salt water. And this is practically the total activity of the Weeper, which, living perilously on the edge of the surf, had to pump to eat and to breathe. The creature had 2 pumping tubes. These later became, because they were furthest toward the light, the eyes of the human being. These tubes had a very rough treatment, getting full of sand, being battered by surf. The inability of a preclear to cry is partly a hang-up in the Weeper. He's about to be hit by a wave, has his eyes full of sand, or is frightened about opening his shell because he may be hit. An occluded case is sometimes merely a case of shell shut. Get the preclear to imagine that his eyes are in his mouth looking out. Get him to scan through such a situation. You will find the Weeper which he has in restimulation. If you make a preclear go through all the physical motions of sobbing convulsively, no matter what his emotions may be, he may connect with the Weeper. Belching, gasping, sobbing, choking, shuddering, trembling are all manifestations of emotional dramatization of the Weeper. The Weeper, originally called the Grim Weeper, or the boo-hoo, had trillions of misadventures. Scanning over these, the auditor will find the one or two which have remained in restimulation and which are open to auditing. The volcanoes. Earth was undergoing volcanic upheavals during the days of life on the beach. Possibly it was this volcanic action which served the chain of evolution, for there is a lack of real reason why this evolution should not be continuing on even today. The progress of evolution was cut at the beach, possibly because the beach is peculiarly subject to violence during volcanic upheavals, sea and land being in clash. Now and then the auditor will find a volcanic upheaval incident in restimulation with its pulse of choking sulphurous smoke. It's been suggested that smoking tobacco is a sort of dramatization of volcanoes, which at the least were spectacular. The birds. Occasionally the creatures of the beach, still shell animals, had their troubles with birds, which had become so earlier. Birds of a very crude construction developed a taste for clams. Clams had no adequate defense against them. If a clam opened its shell, the bird would thrust in a beak or a claw. If the clam then closed, the bird would fly up into the air, the clam would let go, drop on a rock and become bird food. If the clam didn't close, it became bird food anyway. Falling sensations, indecision, and other troubles go with the birds. Sometimes a pre-clear will come up with an incident where he was a bird or even a bat. The auditor should be very careful about what he would call dub-in. For this, one belongs not in the GE, but most likely in the theta line, with the pre-clear taking over the body or form of a bird or bat. The incident is quite valid. It does not, however, belong on the GE line. Theta line incidents occasionally restimulate and group with GE incidents. Auditing brings them apart easily. Thus it is in the case of the birds, for theta beings can fly. Being eaten. In that so many fish and animals were equipped with so many teeth, it is inevitable that somebody somewhere on the track would have been eaten. And so it is, for there are a great many being eaten engrams. These minor circumstances are, of course, motivators. The auditor should realize that the GE itself did some eating, and thus there are many of these eating engrams which are motivators. Diet faddists, people who will not eat meat, are hung in maybes on the subject of digesting and being digested. Many strange psychosomatic ills and skin manifestation may be traced to these incidents. Anyone who knows Technique 80 knows that dispersal of energy is a difficult condition to run. The GE, about to be eaten by a fish, suddenly recognizes the fact, and his attention units disperse. In fact, he may disperse right off the couch. Few auditors, in the absence of Technique 80, have been able to run being eaten incidents. Knowing about the dispersal of attention units, and knowing that this is fear, may permit an auditor at last to run and reduce these being eaten incidents. There is a strange compliance on the part of the GE, in some cases to be eaten. Later on, this may take on the form of compliance in being eaten or abused. Masochism on the GE line may have its seat in such incidents. There is an emotion of being able to at least assist the survival of another body by letting it be fed. Auditing an eating incident consists of requiring the pre-clear to locate the dispersal of his attention units and the center of that dispersal. The attention units may be located far behind the GE in the eating incident and should be traced from there back to the pre-clear until they are reduced. The sloth. There are many steps and incidents between the birds and the sloth. However, they are most of them mobile and few of them are found in high restimulation. With the sloth, we again find the GE in a state which is not very mobile, not easily defensible, in a world where the evolutionary line has produced more developed and more carnivorous beings. Man's line is not very pugnacious. The GE is smarter in man's line than the GEs in other lines, but man's current intelligence comes from an entirely different quarter than evolution. The sloth shows man's nature well so far as GEs are concerned. Leave me alone and I'll leave you alone, is the philosophy here. But the sloth was slow and easily attacked, and he had bad times falling out of trees when hit by snakes, falling off cliffs when attacked by baboons, and the sloth was trying to think. The most pitiful, painful efforts at thinking are found in this series. The sloth is a chain of incidents and misadventures, mostly showing up fear of snakes and falling. The ape. When man had advanced as far as the ape, he was agile and intelligent. The ape is usually an area of overt acts against animals and incidents of protecting the young. The Piltdown Man. Man's first real manhood is found in the Piltdown, a creature, not an ape, yet not entirely a man. It is so named not because it is accurately the real Piltdown Man, but because it has some similarity. The Piltdown contains freakish acts of strange logic, of demonstrating dangerous on one's fellows, of eating one's wife, and other somewhat illogical activities. The Piltdown teeth were enormous, and he was quite careless as to whom and what he bit, and often very much surprised at the resulting damage. Obsessions about biting, efforts to hide the mouth, and early familial troubles can be found in the Piltdown. It's a wonderful area in which to locate GE overt acts. The Caveman. Keeping women at home for men and keeping a man from keeping one at home for women can be found in The Caveman. Here one crippled one's woman to keep her there, or poisoned one's man for having kept her there. Marital malaction often goes back to the caveman. Any condition of interpersonal relationships can be found in this area. Jealousy and overt acts around it. Strangling, smashing in the heads with rocks, quarrels about homes, tribal rebukes, pack instincts can be found in the caveman. Past deaths. It must be kept in mind that past deaths happen to the GE and to the Theta being. Any GE has a regular line of past deaths coming on forward chronologically. The auditor may have some difficulty locating GE deaths in the last few thousand years because deaths are also registered on the Theta line. The GE, under processing, may have had hundreds of Theta beings in command of it down the centuries. There is a matter known as the second facsimile or duplicate facsimile. A Theta being takes a picture of the memory of a GE and carries it as a record. A GE takes a picture of the memories of Theta beings and carries those. Thus, there can be many second facsimiles of past deaths for the same period of time. One should not be surprised at discovering 5 past deaths all occurring in the same span of years. Some will be second facsimiles. A maximum of 2 for that period will be actual incidents. One death happened to the Theta being using another GE line. The other happened to the GE. They will be in different places at different times. Second facsimiles are photographs of the memories of another. They are still pictures usually. The characteristic is that they show up with only 2 or 3 pictures of some long situation. As they are pictures of change and age and everything else, they will show up on an e-meter as charged incidents. But when one tries to audit them, they change into the basic incidents, the actual one, the pictures vanishing. The existence of a real facsimile in the GE or the Theta being will restimulate and hold as locks, pictures taken from former Theta beings and GEs. Any death registering or any incident registering on an e-meter for a certain period in the GE line tells you that there's a real incident in the area. Hunting for the real one, you may find some of these second facsimiles. These usually evaporate when touched, and the actual incident is quickly found. This matter is mentioned because auditors are sometimes puzzled by shifting dates on an e-meter or incidents simultaneously occurring where they should not. An auditor, merely by pursuing the matter, automatically sorts out the second facsimiles which may be there and finds the actual facsimiles which must be audited. Contact between a theta being and a GE must be very intimate for a photograph to be taken of the other's facsimiles, or two beings must be in almost hypnotic rapport for the matter to occur. The facsimiles themselves do not shift from one to the other. One being simply sees, then makes a picture of the facsimile of another when that other has the facsimile in restimulation. Any auditor has seen his preclear's incidents. Assumptions. Assumption is the name given to the act of a theta being taking over a messed body. This is occasionally found to be part of the record of the GE strong enough to be audited. It is the sensation of being taken over thoroughly, sometimes contains the shock of contact. The assumption takes place in most cases just prior to birth for every GE generation. Evidently, theta being assumption is recent on Earth. It's rare to find a theta being coming to Earth 35,000 years ago. Rarer to find one earlier. 70,000 years ago is the present earliest arrival of a theta being on Earth. In a great many cases, the preclear, for the awareness of awareness, is the preclear, is the theta being, will be found to have arrived on Earth for the first time only a few hundred years ago. E-meter reaction occurs in the GE line on these assumptions, and the auditor should be careful to differentiate whether he's reading for the GE or the preclear himself. The GE takes a poor outlook on assumptions, but in reality, it's not much different to the GE to be taken over by a theta being than by a new epicenter developed in the past generation. There is a smothering peculiar to assumption from the viewpoint of the GE, which is followed by a fear of being caught, a desire to hide, a wonderingness at this nothingness which hit him and wrapped him up. Departures. The GE stays with a dying body to the complete end and then soars upwards and obtains a downward view of the dead. This is routine, in that the anaten of death deepens as the end nears and goes deeper than in any other incident. An auditor may leave the end of a death unaudited by carelessness. The theta being leaves earlier than the GE, and the GE sometimes records the departure of the theta being before the GE itself departs from the dying. There are conditional departures of both in bad accidents and operations. The theta being is the principal target of the auditor. The preclear is the theta being. The main thing wrong with any preclear is that he cannot disentangle himself from entities and somatic entities, from demon circuits and nest bodies. He wants to know who he is and where he is. A common complaint from a preclear is that somebody won't let him be himself. The joke of this is that the preclear doesn't know who himself is, much less why he can be allowed to be him. Take any preclear, and using concept running, motivator, overt, and DED, and you will find him instantly in the midst of dozens of engrams. If you ask him to run the concepts, I am myself, you are yourself, what is my name, who am I, and similar concepts which attempt to single out his identity. The only reason why a person becomes aberrated about other people is that he cannot distinguish between himself and others. You find preclears, and auditors too, who go around thinking themselves burdened with facsimiles of others who become restimulated and then try to run the engrams of others to cool the restimulation. Identification of the real I is the sure cure for identification of self with others and others with others. Who is the preclear? He is the theta being. How does one really deaberrate and clear a preclear? By clearing the theta being. by running genetic entity incidents, by cleaning up present life, by running past deaths. The auditor can get rid of psychosomatics by the bale for the pre-clear. The auditor can practically rebuild the body. He can clarify thought by taking away pains restimulated by thinking. He can do 1,000 marvels never before possible here on earth, or anywhere else for that matter. But when he's done all these things, often at great labour, what does he have? He has a composite being, good enough to be called Homo novus, a theta-animated messed body possessed of new and desirable attributes. That doesn't mean he has the pre-clear cleared. That doesn't mean that he's located the pre-clear for the pre-clear and restored an ultimate self-determinism. It means the auditor's done well. The auditor has made what we are calling a messed clear, a good, sane, rational messed being about a skyscraper higher than Homo sapiens. But in that Homo sapiens is a pretty horrible thing to be, this isn't good enough, not nearly good enough. This Homo novus is limited in his self-determinism by all the economic and social restrictions of an aberrated society. He is not free of food, clothing or shelter. He dies when you get him too cold. He perishes when the oxygen content drops too low. He's living in a tolerance band which keeps him cramped to the face of one second-rate planet in a 10th-rate system, prey to all the ill will that blows. Is this being free or self-determined? Maybe he's good enough to overlord his fellows into a security for himself never before possible. But that is his only real route towards security. He must fight and command for his 3 squares. He must use police protection in order to keep himself free of bullet holes and bumper marks. Compared to Homo sapien, Homo novus is very high and godlike. Compared to a truly self-determined being, Homo novus is an ant, ready to die under anybody's misstep. This universe is a rough universe. It's a terrible and deadly universe. Only the strong survive it. Only the ruthless can own it. Given one weak spot, a being cannot long endure it, for this universe will search it out and enlarge it and fester and probe it until that weak spot is a festering wound so large that the being is engulfed by his own sores. Fighting this battle for survival, and fight it he must, a being in the messed universe cannot seem to afford decency or charity or ethics. He cannot afford any weakness, any mercy. The moment he does, he is lost. For he's surrounded by chilled, coarse rock and molten energy, which, no matter the state of aberration of his social surroundings, will engulf him instantly that he ceases to obey the very least laws of mist. This is a universe of force. It is not a universe of reason. Brutal, unthinking, without decency or mercy, messed force awaits with punishment any being with any weakness. The possession of a messed body is a liability, for through that body the being can be given pain, can be regimented by the routine demands of eating and care from harm until at the very, very highest he can be but a puppet, dancing to the spin of some unthinking planet under the strong glare of a remote and careless sun. Under these conditions, a being burdened with care and liability of a body, made uncertain by an unknowingness, bows to strange and non-existent gods, resorts to terrible makeshifts in lieu of justice, cringes before the mightier bomb, the sharper blade. You have examined an engram. A standard engram is simply the collision of the body with the messed universe, with sufficient impact to produce the confusion of attention known as unconsciousness. Should you care to make a test, just run care of the body as a total therapy. You will discover that by running out the postulates of a pre-clear about his body and its care, and his injunctions and insistences to others that they care for their bodies, you can produce soaring changes in tone. An entire book can be written concerning this therapy. An entire book has been written about it, the first in Dianetics. This therapy could be styled the efforts of a theta being to reconcile the frailty of a mess body with the ethics of a theta being. They do not reconcile these two, Schopenhauer, Zeno, and names without number in philosophy have been trying to make this reconciliation for eons. One says, defeat it all and die, for only by dying can you defeat it. Another says, you can't win, therefore the only victory is in refusing to try to win. Christianity and a million other unities have struggled with this problem, and the result is a potpourri of answers, none of which reconcile the problem. You have a soul, it goes off somewhere, you don't know about it. You are a soul, you don't know about it. Today we live in a vast cult called Worship the Body. Medical doctors, school teachers, parents, traffic officers, the whole society unites into this war cry, care for the body. This stems from the ignorance that the body is all that one has, that he will have just one body, that his total devotion is the care of that body. A body is a vegetable. It's not even a sentient vegetable, for it lacks perception in the whole theta range. Like any vegetable, it grows from seed and has habit patterns which help it survive. And like any vegetable, one way or another, it gets used by others. Early theta beings saw mess bodies acting and being as though they were self-motivated. This was a curiosity. The early theta being did not know that these mess bodies depended wholly for their wits under the guidance of a decayed theta being. The bodies looked like entities of considerable force and skill. The theta beingness of them was hidden and unapparent. Thus even theta beings have been fooled by messed bodies. A messed body, whether it belongs to the race of man or the race of ants, is yet but an animated vegetable. Given a theta being to guide it, it becomes part of a composite, such as Homo sapiens. Here we have a theta being decayed into unknowingness, devoted to the care of a mess body. The I of this body, the actual volition of it, all its wits and skills, are theta things derived from the guidance of a theta being. By itself, the body would live, walk around, react, sleep, kill, and direct an existence no better than that of a field mouse or a zombie. Put a theta being over it, and it becomes possessed of ethics and morals and direction and goals and the ability to reason. It becomes this strange thing called Homo sapiens, a being above animals and yet an animal. Give this mess body a psychotic theta being, and you get a sort of Frankenstein's monster. Give this mess body a nearly unconscious theta being and you get a zombie. The body is a carbon-oxygen engine which runs at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The theta being is the engineer running this engine in a Homo sapien. There is already an entity running this engine, the GE, but there is here only a total devotion to avoiding pain, seeking survival factors of the meanest sort, begetting new mess bodies. Every cell in that body has its own theta. The GE is theta. A theta being is something else entirely. In the first place, the theta being came into being without the need of a mess body, without the need of motors. It is close to a perpetual motion picture machine in that it can create energy and impulses. It thinks without facsimiles. It can act without experience. It can know simply by being. When we've talked of optimum performance in Dianetics and Scientology, we've talked about the actual top-level capabilities of the theta being, not the capabilities of the messed being. Early work in Dianetics treats of the composite called Homo sapien and treats that composite for what it is, an identity of several parts which act in greater or less coordination. You can go right on treating this composite being as a unit, you can go right on treating him and getting results for which you will be praised. But you must know that you are not treating the actual identity when you treat the messed body. You are furthering a composite, and actually you are subscribing to the international cult called Care of the Body. You can, at your own choice, go on living with and processing this composite known as Homo sapien and create Homo novus. You can use Dianetics to make hitherto impossible strides, but be advised that in this choice you are living with paradoxes which no philosopher in all the ages ever reconciled. The injustice of death, the depravity of human beings, as in Plato, the penalty of assisting another, the impossibility of having good ARC and survival too, the liability of being kind and merciful, and every unanswerable religious paradox known. You, by persisting in yesterday's reality, are persisting then in problems which have never been resolved with the factors accepted. You are demanding of a messed theta composite that he be self-determined when every zephyr from a hard universe contains death for him and can turn him like a top. You are demanding that he be careful when his only salvation is to be carefree. You are saddling him with all the unanswered riddles of an aberrated life in an aberrated world, and you're condemning a preclear to the dwindling spiral, for the theta being, as part of the composite, decays fast and soon dies forever in the rigid apathy of nest. Thus this data is given you. In lieu of the data, the only thing which could be given man is the answering salute of the gladiators, they who are about to die. As an auditor, the choice is yours to make, the paradoxes or the answer. I would not give you this data unless it can be demonstrated on any preclear with ease, and I would not give it to you unless you needed it. Here it is.